Virtue is of utmost importance when it comes to governing a country and bringing peace to the world. In the Great Learning, it is said, those who wish to illustrate bright virtue in the world should first govern well their own state. In order to govern well their state, they should first regulate their families. In order to regulate their families, they should first cultivate themselves. It is obvious that cultivating one's virtue is a cornerstone for bringing harmony to a family, a country, and the world. Greed, on the other hand, is the source of all misfortune. The elimination of greed is the first priority in cultivating one's virtue. This is especially important for those in possession of power. Zhuxi, a grand synthesizer of the Neo-Confucian tradition, said, "There is nothing more dangerous than greed." Many people have their lives ruined because of greed. One should not drink from the spring of greed because one might fall into the abyss and meet one's end. In the Book of Changes, it is said, families who do good will receive many blessings. Families who do bad will suffer from many disasters. Also, Mencius said, when people of all levels struggle for benefit, the country is in danger. Professor Yuli Liu expounded on her interpretation of the governing principles of ancient China and reminded people that cultivating virtue and eliminating greed is not only about one's own personal fate, but also about the fate of a nation. Here, from Yuli Liu's lecture series on the encyclopedic work, The Governing Principles of Ancient China, is the section Cultivation of Virtue starts with eliminating greed. Professor Yuli Liu graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy from Renmin University of China. She is currently a professor at the Department of Philosophy at the Party School of Central Committee of CPC and a mentor for doctoral students majoring in ethics. She is also a visiting professor at Tsinghua College, Sun Yat-sen University. Professor Yuli Liu has published many academic papers, received a PhD from the University of Hull, UK, and is a postdoctoral scholar at the National University of Singapore. She has been invited to give lectures and participate in workshop seminars in the UK, Italy, the USA, Canada, Australia, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia and Hong Kong. In 2015, 2016 and 2017, she was invited to UNESCO headquarters in Paris to give talks based on the governing principles of ancient China. The central theme of her talks was the importance of the sage's education. In other words, learning from the wisdom of the past and also how to promote moral education. She has contributed greatly towards the dissemination of Oriental culture in the Western world. This video was edited by the Governing Principles of Ancient China translation team of the Pure Land Learning College Association and is based on the lectures by Professor Yuli Liu.
Hello everyone, it's good to be with you today to share with you the wisdom in the governing principles of ancient China. Today we'll talk about the importance of eliminating greed. The Governing Principles of Ancient China is a multi-volume compilation of principles on how to govern a country. How does one begin to do so? Let's start with a conversation in a special period of ancient China that was recorded in Lietz in the Governing Principles of Ancient China. The Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period in ancient China was known as the Golden Age of Chinese philosophy. It was an era in which a broad range of thoughts and ideas were developed, which was called the contention of 100 schools of thought. Liu Yu Ko, known as Lietz, who lived in the Warring States period, was a prominent figure in Taoism. His ideas were recorded in the book Lietz. Some treatises in liets were included in the governing principles of ancient China. This conversation was between a king and a hermit called Zhan He. King Zhuang of the state of Chu asked Zhan He, "How does one govern a country?" Zhan He said, "I only know how to cultivate myself. I don't know how to govern a country." The king said, "I own the entire state, and I wish I could maintain it and govern it well." Zhan He replied, "I've never heard of a king who had cultivated himself well, yet his country was in turmoil. And I've never heard of a king who hadn't cultivated himself, yet his country was governed well." So the fundamental key is the king's self-cultivation of virtue, and I shall not comment on any secondary matters like how to govern a country. The king responded, "Well said." There are many such records in the compilation, The Governing Principles of Ancient China, in which are included many conversations like this from books of the past in order to provide guidance to the emperors. We can easily summarise the essence of the compilation, which is the cultivation of virtue of the emperor himself. We can also read from the great learning, from the Son of Heaven to the masses of the people. All must consider the self-cultivation of virtue to be fundamental. Some people in history have claimed that Confucianism is a kind of mind opium used by the ruler to fool the people. I disagree with that. As we have just read in this Confucian text, the emperor should cultivate virtue first. If the ruler, in other words the emperor, wanted to fool the people, he would not require himself to do self-cultivation. On the contrary, he would require his subjects to do so. From here, we can understand the teaching in the governing principles of ancient China is not the tool for rulers to fool the public, but to encourage leaders to cultivate their virtue first for better governing. President Xi Jinping is a person who attaches importance to self-cultivation and has provided us with a great example. We can see that he launched campaigns against corruption in China, after which substantial progress has been achieved. Why is he able to do so? The most important factor is that he himself took the initiative and set good examples for all the people. When he travelled to the south of China for an inspection, he instructed that there be no extravagant meals and no fleets of cars and escorts. He ate simple self-service food in the canteens and created no disturbance in the daily lives of the people. With such an example, all government employees could easily follow suit. That's why we could see the great results in the fighting of corruption in China. President Xi has great confidence in the traditional Chinese culture, and he attaches great importance to it. He also applies the essence of traditional Chinese values in the governing of modern China. Now that we understand the importance of self-cultivation, how should we start? Let's turn our attention once again to the great learning. There are 8 progressive steps to bring peace to the world. They are, number 1, to eliminate greed. Number 2, to illuminate one's conscience. Number 3, to have sincere thoughts. Number 4, to rectify the mind. Number 5, to cultivate oneself. Number 6, to manage a family. Number 7, to govern a country. And finally, number 8, to bring peace to the world. The first step is to eliminate greed. The literal meaning is to fight or to battle greed for all kinds of things. One must be able to resist the temptation of money and sex, fame and gain. In simple words, greed. This is why the wise Chinese of the past taught us that the priority of cultivation is the elimination of greed. Without fulfilling this very first step, one could not make progress in the remaining steps. To sum up, Governing a country starts with one's self-cultivation of virtues, and this cultivation starts with eliminating greed.
Professor Yuli Liu quoted text from Lietz in the Governing Principles of Ancient China of a conversation between King Zhong of Chu and Jian He in the Warring States period of how to govern a country. She introduced the well-known saying that governing a country is based on the cultivation of one's virtue. How should one start with the cultivation of virtue? We read in Mencius, "When people of all levels struggle for benefit, the country is in danger." In other words, when people of all levels in a country struggle for profits and gains, the nation would be in danger. Therefore, in order to govern a country, cultivating one's virtue is the first priority. To cultivate one's virtue, one must first eliminate greed. Was Jian He merely talking theoretically? And was Mencius being overly cautious? Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. Cultivation of virtue starts with eliminating greed.
Let's turn our attention to a passage from the records of the Grand Historian that was included in the Governing Principles of Ancient China as another example. King Li of Zhou ascended to power, and he was greedy for wealth and property. He was close to Duke Yi of Rong, who amassed wealth and property through his power to give to the king. At the time, there was a loyal minister by the name of Rui Liangfu. He said to King Li of Zhou, "The royal house seems to be in decline. You see, those learned and virtuous intellectuals of the past were able to see one tiny clue which reveals something big. When they saw a wrong action by a king or a ruler, they knew how a situation would unfold." What omen did Rui see? He explained, "Duke Yi of Rong is good at monopolizing profits, but knows not grave disasters." Actually, not only this, he did not know the adverse effects of his deeds on society either. He went on and said, "Benefit is the resource for all beings to survive on and is supported by heaven and earth. Anyone who wants to monopolize the profits will experience great harm." We can easily understand that an uneven distribution of benefits would bring inequality and eventually disharmony. Rui Liangfu continued and said, "All living things on earth depend on the resources bestowed by heaven and earth. How could they be monopolized? Such monopoly would definitely generate anger. Those people are not prepared for grave disasters, and they abetted you, the king, to do the same. How could your reign be long-lasting?" From this historical record, we can see that Rui Liangfu was a daring minister who was performing his duty as a loyal minister and consultant to the king. He was doing what a conscientious person would do, and as a minister, he was not afraid of putting forth his suggestions, which went against the king's will. Rui Liangfu continued to say, "When ordinary people monopolize wealth, they are called thieves. If a ruler of a country like you acted in such a way, how many people would still pledge their loyalty to you? If Duke Yi of Rong were to be placed in an important position, the Zhou dynasty would inevitably fall. It was a pity that the king didn't listen to what Rui Liangfu had suggested. He made Duke Yi of Rong a high-ranking minister for important state affairs." The king ruled ruthlessly and was extravagant and arrogant. All the people in the capital were complaining. At this time, the Duke of Xiao put forth his suggestions. "The masses cannot bear your decrees." However, the king didn't listen. Instead, he became more angry and organised for a wizard to keep an eye on those who criticised him. Upon hearing from the wizard that people were saying bad things about him, the king would have them killed immediately. Therefore, fewer and fewer people were willing to put forth their suggestions. The feudal lords no longer came to pay their tribute, yet King Li of Zhou continued to act mercilessly. One could easily guess the result of King Li of Zhou. We can find records in the governing principles of ancient China, which collected texts from the records of the grand historian. It says, "The people didn't dare to speak and only exchanged glances in the street. And what's worse was that King Li of Zhou did not understand what he had done wrong. On the contrary, he bragged about himself when addressing the Duke of Shao. You see, I have eliminated criticism. There is no more criticism from the people." The Duke of Shao responded, "The prevention of people's words is harder than the prevention of a flood. Once a flood breaks out, many people will be harmed. The words of people are the same. One should divert water before the bank bursts, and one should encourage the people to talk. In doing so, a wise ruler would find out whether he is conducting good governance or not." When the people spoke out, good ideas they had suggested could be put into practice. However, if their mouths are blocked and they are not allowed to express their views, then who would pledge loyalty and support you? However, King Li of Zhou didn't listen, and as a result, 3 years later, a revolt broke out against King Li of Zhou. At the end, he fled and hid in a place called Zhe. A new king, King Xuan of Zhou, replaced him and ascended to the throne. The new king rectified the situation and tried to observe the moral practices of the past sage kings, such as Kings Wen and Wu of Zhou and Kings Cheng and Kung of Western Zhou, and resumed virtues education. It was after all this that the feudal lords once again pledged loyalty to the Zhou dynasty. From the story of King Li of Zhou, we can understand that without the self-cultivation of the ruler and without eliminating greed, the country could not be governed well. And just as King Li of Zhou demonstrated to us, one could end up with bad consequences.
In the last session, Professor Yuli Liu quoted the story from records of the grand historian in the governing principles of ancient China and told us how the loyal minister Ri Liangfu suggested to King Li of Zhou that if a powerful official of the state were too greedy for wealth, the people would bound to revolt and the country would fall into a state of chaos. The wealth of the country belongs to all its people, and the wealth of the world belongs to the people of the world. If a person used power to embezzle wealth from a country, he would not only be criticized by everyone, he would be doomed with disasters. In the chapter 6 Strategies, taken from a Chinese military classic in the governing principles of ancient China, King Wu of Zhou's military commander-in-chief Jiang Ziya said, "The world is not a world of one person, it is a world of every person. He who shares the benefits of the world rules the world. He who monopolizes the benefits of the world loses the world. Heaven provides time and earth gives wealth. Those who share these two with others are people with benevolence. People will gather around benevolence. Therefore, we can see that one must not give rise to a greedy thought, let alone act on it." Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. Cultivation of virtue starts with eliminating greed.
Emperor Tai Tsung of the Tang dynasty, one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, was able to achieve good governance during the time he was in power. The Zhangguan reigned thanks to the governing principles of ancient China, which he had instructed to be compiled. It has been recorded in the Essentials of Governance in the Zhangguan reign that he had many discussions with his ministers and emphasized the importance of self-cultivation, especially the elimination of greed. Emperor Tai Tsung implemented the essence of the governing principles of ancient China in the governing of his country, which later became a great country. Let's have a look at the chapter titled On Greed and Meanness. Emperor Tai Tsung was recorded in it as having said the following to his ministers. Imagine there is a very precious pearl. Anyone who has possession of it would treasure it with great care. It would be silly of the owner to use it as a slingshot projectile. However, there are many people who do not understand that a human life is more precious than a pearl. Yet many people would risk their life in want of money by breaching the law. Those who would do so in the form of bribery are the ones who do not know how to treasure their life. A precious pearl is something that is external to a person. If one doesn't know to not waste the pearl and use it as a slingshot projectile, how could a person, knowing the value of a human being, exchange one life for money? Should all the ministers perform their duties well, uphold integrity and fairness, contribute to the country and bring benefit to the common people, they could receive good salaries and high positions and ranks. They would not need to seek wealth by taking bribes. They should understand once their corrupt behaviour was exposed and they inevitably received corresponding punishment that such behaviour was silly and ridiculous. Let's have a look at another talk by Emperor Tai Tsung. In the second year of the Zhangguan reign, Emperor Tai Tsung said to his attendants, I once said that a greedy person is a person who does not truly understand how to properly obtain money. Why did I say so? Consider the officials who are above the 5th rank and who enjoy a very generous salary and other benefits. If they are too greedy and are silly enough to accept bribes, when such behaviour is exposed, their positions would be taken away and their entitlements could also be gone. Those who take bribes are not people who know how to make money properly. They would have gained little but lost much. Then he concluded, a greedy king would end up losing his country. A greedy minister would be doomed to die prematurely. Let's look at a third talk by Emperor Tai Tsung in the 4th year of the Zhangguan reign. He again had a conversation with his ministers. He said, I am the emperor, yet I dare not be sluggish at any time. What is the reason for this? Because I am concerned about the welfare of my people, and I wish all of you, my ministers, could have wealth and merits. Heaven is high and earth is deep. I have always paid great respect towards them. If you could have respect for heaven and earth the way I respect them, and you could abide by the laws, then all the people would live in peace and harmony, and all of you, my ministers, could have lasting happiness too. This talk makes us think of an ancient Chinese saying, a virtuous person with much wealth would lose his ambition. An ignorant person with much wealth would make mistakes. We can see that these two lines are full of wisdom. When a virtuous person gets rich, with more money than he could spend in a lifetime, would he still work as hard as he had done before? Would he put forth as much effort and struggle? With much wealth but little wisdom, a virtuous person might only indulge himself in luxury and not in self-improvement. He might still cultivate himself, but he might not be as resolute as he would in the past. This situation corresponds with another ancient Chinese saying, high-rank officials come from humble families. Many successful people led a difficult life intentionally in their younger years. They did so in order to maintain their resolution and to train themselves mentally. Even if they had the means to, they would not lead an extravagant life. As for an ignorant person, if he were to receive a lot of money, he wouldn't know how to use it for a proper cause. For example, in society nowadays, not many people are promoting traditional education. If money could be spent on education to cultivate talented people who had virtue and ability, it would be a great thing for the benefit of both the country and the people. However, very few people have the foresight to contribute money to this cause. Instead, people spend money on luxuries. They indulge themselves in pleasure-seeking. Some people, without hesitation, spend large amounts of money in the pursuit of pleasure. They buy luxury goods without blinking their eyes. But when the time comes to do something good to benefit both the country and the people, they become very stingy. These people who don't have money wouldn't be able to do any evil things. But those who have money have more opportunities to do evil things and create more bad karma. Once again, the wise ancient Chinese summarized, "Wealth usually cannot last for more than 3 generations. This rule applies to ordinary people. Those who cultivate merits and wisdom hopefully could have their wealth last for more than 3 generations."
A greedy king would end up losing his country. A greedy minister is doomed to die prematurely. Greed can kill a person or destroy a country. This is not an overstatement. Professor Liu quoted from a chapter titled On Greed and Meanness from the Essentials of Governance in the Jin Guan reign, the words of Emperor Taizong against corruption, and also the story of how he himself led the fight against corruption. We should learn that if our leaders and officials could fight off corruption, the work units under their leadership would be clean and without corruption. If all of a country's leaders and officials could eliminate corruption and control their greed, the country could be corruption-free and prosperous. Historically, King Liu Zhou, a tyrant, governed his country with brutality, and his rule was a classic example of indulging in greed and corruption. Contrasting this, Emperor Taizong of Tang had good governance, which was a classic example of how to fight greed and corruption. The difference between the two leaders saw the demise of King Liu Zhou and the golden years of Jin Guan reign of Emperor Taizong of Tang. It also showed us the difference in the level of self-cultivation between the two. Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. Cultivation of virtue starts with eliminating greed.
In the 7th year of the Zhangguan period, Emperor Taizong went on an inspection trip of Puzhou. At that time, the Puzhou provincial governor was Zhao Yuan Kai, who was a minister of the Sui dynasty, which was overthrown. In the 12th year of the Da Yi reign in the Sui dynasty, Emperor Yang of Sui toured Jiangdu, which is the city of Yangzhou today. Zhao Yuankai was in charge of logistics and the supply of good food and wine. Emperor Yang and his Empress Qiao and the Emperor's favourite beautiful companions had enjoyed some especially pleasing wine each day during the trip. Because of the excellent food and wine that was provided, Zhao Yuankai was promoted to a prominent position in Jiangdu. He truly knew how to make his superior happy. Emperor Taizong was now coming to inspect Puzhou, and Zhao Yuankai wanted to use his old tricks again. He ordered elderly men to wear yellow garments and kneel at the roadside to welcome the emperor. He also had extravagant government buildings built and decorated the city gates and walls to impress Emperor Taizong. Furthermore, he secretly bought several hundred sheep and several thousand fish to give to the emperor's relatives. After learning about this, Emperor Taizong summoned Zhao Yuankai and reprimanded him. He said, "I have inspected the areas between the Yellow River and the Luo River, and I have passed through several prefectures. All expenses were paid by the local authorities. Obviously, the sheep and fish you had prepared for us and the decorated courtyards and houses are undoubtedly the old practice from the previous dynasty, and that is why the Sui dynasty fell. You must understand this and change your old practices. Zhao Yuankai felt very ashamed and scared upon hearing these words. He couldn't eat or drink for several days, after which he died. Reading about history, we know the Sui dynasty fell very quickly after its founding. How could Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty achieve the golden years of the Zhang-Guan reign in such a short period of time? It is because Emperor Taizong attached great importance to learning lessons from history, and because he knew how to cultivate virtue, which is the basis for governing a country. He was able to guard himself against extravagance too. There are so many such examples in the Essentials of Governance in the Zheng-Guan reign. Analects, which was compiled into the governing principles of ancient China, also stated, "If you, sir, were not covetous, although you should reward others to do it, they would not steal." This is an interesting statement. It means that if the high-ranking leaders are not greedy, the people will not steal, even if encouraged and rewarded to do so. If the high-ranking leaders favour rare valuables and are greedy for money and profit, the people will follow suit and the whole society will actively pursue benefits. Emperor Taizong governed his country well and created a golden era. He is regarded as one of the greatest emperors in China's history. He was not an accidental hero. Let's look at another conversation from Emperor Taizong. In the 16th year of the Zhang-Guan reign, Emperor Taizong said to his attendants, "The wise men of the past said, when birds want to build nests in the forest, they always seek the highest tree and build on top. Why? Because they want to hide their nest. Fish in the water prefer the very deep water so that they can choose a deep hole in which to hide. However, birds and fish do get caught by men. Why? Because they were not able to resist the temptation and took the bait set by men. The same applies to the ministers who hold office and enjoy a generous salary. They should be loyal and upright, honest and altruistic. This is the only way they can avoid disasters and maintain their wealth. Just as the wise men of the past said, there is no door to disaster or happiness. One finds his own way in. Those who knowingly violated the law did so for the financial gains. What's the difference then between these people and the fish and the birds? So you should all think hard about these words and use them as a mirror and a warning.
Professor Yu Liu is of the view that Emperor Taizong of Tang created the golden years of the Zhang-Guan reign and became a wise emperor in the Chinese history due to his policies against corruption and greed for himself, for his ministers, and for the entire country. The policies against corruption and greed were a result of his self-cultivation of virtue. The reason for his achievement in virtue was largely because of his familiarity with the governing principles of ancient China. Therefore, Professor Yu Liu reminded us again that those who want to accomplish much must first cultivate their virtue, and that the cultivation of virtue starts with eliminating greed.
What is the significance of studying the governing principles of ancient China today in the fight against corruption? If our leaders and officials could benefit from the advice in this compilation, they would be inspired by the wisdom in it. They would be able to refrain from being tempted by wealth, sex, fame and gain. Peace of mind would come when wealth was acquired properly, when people know that greed for wealth and profit will ultimately bring significant losses, just like fetching water with a bamboo colander. They would no longer be greedy for wealth and profit. That is all for today. Thank you.